Okay, today we're going to start looking at sequence and series. This is a new unit. The polar unit was supposed to be next, but we went ahead and flipped the two units. So we'll do sequence and series first, and then at the end we'll do polar. So first we're just going to talk about what the difference is between sequence and series. And you've pretty much done this before since you were in like elementary school. It's basically a pattern of numbers, and then you have to figure out like how to get from one number to the next. So a sequence is the list of numbers. A series is when you take that list and add them together. Okay, so talking about some other terms that we'll use. If you have an infinite sequence, that means the sequence goes on forever. So you have A1, A2, A3, but the way you read that is A sub 1. So that just means the first term. So here's the first term, second term, third term, fourth term. You get it. A sub n, they just use n because there is no last term, so n could be anything. N could be the 32nd term. N could be the 541st term. N is just a variable to say any term in this series. Let's see. If the domain of the function consists of the first n positive integer, the sequence is a finite sequence with n terms. So if you're saying you want to add together the first 5 terms, that means n is 5. So it does have a certain number of terms. But moving on. So we have this formula here. Remember, n is the number in the sequence. So we want to write the first 4 terms of the sequence. So this will be the first term, second term, third term, fourth term. That's the spots. So we're going to plug in those numbers for n. So for the first spot, I'm going to do -2 times 1, which is still -2, plus 7 is 5. If I want the second term, I'm plugging in a 2. So it'll be -4 plus 7. Plug in a 3, -6 plus 7. Plug in a 4, -12 plus, -8 plus 7. So there's the first 4 terms. Now we're going to do the same thing over here. Spot number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. So y'all take a second and try to plug in those numbers to your equation to get your first 4 terms. Are you doing it? Okay, let's check our answers. So when you plugged in a 1, you got 2. When you plugged in a 2, you got a fraction that couldn't be simplified. When you plugged in a 3, you simplified. No, you didn't. You got 4/3. But when you plugged in a 4, you got you got 5 over 4. What am I doing? Yeah, that's great. Any questions? Okay, moving right along. Now, say they give an equation like we did before, but they're not saying I want the first 4 terms. They give you the term that they want. So if they want the 31st term, I'm plugging 31 in for n. So I'm going to say -1 to the 31st power, and then 2 times 31 minus 3. -1 to the 31st power, that's odd, so it stays negative. And that'll be 62 minus 3. So that'll be 59 times -1. That's -59. And let's do the same thing over here. But what number are you going to plug in? A 6. Good job. So that'll be 6 times -2 times 10. That's -120. Easy peasy. Okay, what we have now is called the recursive formula. This formula tells you the next term. So no matter what term you're on, it tells you how to get to the next one. So if you're on the second term, it'll tell you how to get to the third term. If you're on the 15th term, it'll tell you how to get to the 16th term. So here's the recursive formula for this sequence. And what this says is, to get to the next term, you take the term that you're on and subtract 2. So it gives us a sub 7. So the 7th spot is a 9. Well, it wants us to find the 8th spot and the 9th spot. So if I have 9 and I want to find the 8th spot and the 9th spot. All I have to do, it tells me, is subtract 2. So 9 minus 2 is 7, and then 7 minus 2 is 5. So there's my 2 answers. Okay, now let's talk about series. Series is that thing where we're adding them all together. So what it looks like when you're solving is this. This is a summation notation. So this is something that you can type in a calculator. You might have seen this on Excel when you're trying to add a bunch of columns together. And it's gonna give you, you're gonna give it a equation, tell it what numbers you wanna add together, and then it'll add it all together for you. But if you're gonna do it by hand, you would figure out the first term, figure out the second term, figure out the third term, all the way to the term that you want, and then add it together. This lower number is always gonna be 0 or 1. So basically, it wants you to go from the first term to the nth term and then add it together. So let's take a look at what that looks like on the next page. Okay, so I want the sum of the first 1 through 5 numbers in this series. So here's my equation. I is the number that we're plugging into. It's kind of like our n. It could be any variable that it wants to be, and normally they use I. And so we're going to take turns. We're going to plug in a 1, then we'll plug in a 2, then we'll plug in a 3, then we'll plug in a 4, then we'll plug in a 5, and then we'll add all those numbers together. So when I plug in a 1, 3 times 1 is 1, minus 2 is 1. If I plug in a 2, that's 6 minus 2. If I plug in a 3, that's 9 minus 2. If I plug in a 4, that's 12 minus 2. And then if I plug in a 5, that's 15 minus 2. And so now you're just adding these numbers together, and that's your answer. Now let me show you how to do it in the calculator. Let's see. Okay, so to get this summation thing in the calculator, if you have the TI Nspire at home, you're gonna go to Menu, you're gonna go to Calculus, and you're gonna go to Sum. Okay, and now we're just gonna type in what we see. They used I, I'm gonna use X. It doesn't matter what variable you use. So I'm gonna type in 3x minus 2, and the top number is 5. And that tells me it's 35. So either way works. You're gonna wanna use a calculator though. Say the top number is like 547. You're not gonna wanna sit there and put in all those numbers. If you don't have a graphic or a TI Nspire at home, I'm sure you could go online and just Google like summation calculator, and you'll be able to type that in. So let's go ahead and use the calculator to do 8 and 9. If you want to do it by hand, you go, sis. I'm going to use the calculator. So that's x equals 0, 2x squared, and then a 5. Oops, that's not where the 5 goes. And then a 5. So 110. Okay, number 9. X equals 2, 2 to the x power to 5, and that's 60. And that's the summation. Okay, so now it's time for you to practice here. I'm going to do a few of these with you and then leave a few blank for you to work on your own. So let's review some of this stuff that we just learned. So I'm going to write the first 5 terms. I'm going to put some blanks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if I want the first term, I'm going to plug in a 1. 3 times 1 plus 1. If I want the second term, I'm plugging in a 2. That's 6 plus 1. Plug in a 3. That's 9 plus 1. And so on. Plug in a 4. Plug in a 5. Okay. You'll do the same thing for 2, 3, oh, where's number 4? 5 and 6. So go ahead and practice those on your own. But let's look at number 7. So I need the first 5 terms. 2, 3, 4, 5. And so I'm plugging in a 1, plugging in a 2, plugging in a 3, plugging in a 4, plugging in a 5. Well, if you'll notice, there's no variable to plug into. That means the answer for every blank is 2/3. Because no matter what you plug in, it's gonna be 2/3 because there's nowhere to plug into. Okay, now let's look at the recursive formula. Remember, this tells you what comes next, how to get what comes next. So we still want the first 5. So I'm gonna draw some blanks. 2, 3, 4, 5. Now the first blank, it already tells me, is 28. To get the next blanks, it tells me I just want to subtract 4. So minus 4, minus 4, minus 4, minus 4. There we go. Let's do number 10. So on the first 5, 2, 3, 4, 5. It gives me the first one is 32. To get all the next ones, I multiply by 1/2. Multiplying by 1/2 is the same thing as dividing by 2. So divided by 2, divided by 2, divided by 2, divided by 2. Y'all try number 11. Okay, last one is the summation. And again, I'm just gonna type it in my calculator, so I'll review one more time how to do that. So menu, calculus, sum. I'm gonna type in x equals 1, and then 2x plus 1, all the way to 5. And I got 35. I want y'all to try 15, 16, and 17. All right, have fun.